Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Calvin Cater of former waiters, Jack Slack, and it's the Jack Slack podcast coming at you on Monday, the 17th of January, and the fights are back on. Thank God. People can listen to the show again. I was talking about Rising last. Oh, actually, no, the Boycast. But the Boycast preview was Rising, and nobody gave a shit. Slow card, gonna say. I said on YouTube, I said, "What do you make of them? How are them fights then?" And someone appropriately commented, "Just the one fight, actually." It really was a bit like that. So there's a few we'll touch on, but mainly it's this banger between Calvin Cater and Giga Chikadze. There was a lot up in the air here. I think a lot of people felt like Calvin Cater was probably done. A lot of people felt like Giga Chikadze was the next big thing because of the nature of his last fight. You know, fought Edson Barboza, looked incredible. And that's the thing with Chikadze. He has fought an awful lot of sloppy competition. If you're not familiar with Gladiator Challenge, look him up because Giga fought a guy who was like 1-32 there. And all of that guy's fights have been with Gladiator Challenge. A little bit sus. Basically, Gladiator Challenge was the Explode FC for Giga Chikadze. And then he got to the UFC, struggled with people like Brandon Davis, fought a 4-foot-tall bantamweight called Erwin Rivera, still couldn't get a finish. But then Giga had that fight with Cub Swanson. Obviously, Cub Swanson on the way down, but good win. And then the fight against Edson Barboza. And I think now we're all sort of going like, yes, Edson Barboza's had a hard run. But also, Edson Barboza, as we pointed out in the Boycast, fought a fight where he was in a straight kickboxing match with Chikadze, and he also wasn't playing to any strengths in that kickboxing match. Like, he came out, backed Chikadze up to the fence, which was obviously the game plan because his corner kept telling him to keep using the double jab between rounds, and then he'd use it, and Chikadze would move straight back until his foot hit the fence, and then Edson would stand there and stare at him. So you've done the pressure, you've taken away the space. He doesn't have anywhere to retreat, which is a big part of setting up the... I'm not going to call it the Giga kick, the standard left kick to the body from a southpaw stance. You know, he likes space behind him to make space. He likes space to retreat. And he likes space to readjust and stuff like that and avoid takedowns and so on. But Edson Barboza did almost nothing. He got him to the fence and then stared at him. So Giga's comfortable planting his feet and kicking off the fence. But then there was Calvin Cater coming in the other side of this, where he took possibly the worst arse beating of all time, statistically, against Max Holloway. And we all felt like, yes, that's going to be, you know, even if you thought like, no, he's not that outmatched in the kickboxing section of this fight, or in the matchup specifically, you had to have questions about like how he's going to come back. 500 punches to the head in a real fight is going to change you in some way. There are dudes who've taken beatings like that in boxing and then just not been the same in the ring after that. I mean, he's not going to be the same in terms of like, at some point, he's going to forget his favourite colour, but that might be years down the line. However, he took a full year off, came back, looked amazing. And a lot of the stuff we talked about in the Boycast was present. I think the key things we touched on were like variety, threatening the takedown. Threatening the takedown was a big part of it. Pressure, keeping him on the back foot, and actually taking advantage of that. And that's something that Calvin Cater came out and immediately did. Tons of stuff I want to hit on from this fight. Haven't got a notepad, so I'm just going to go off the top of my head. But number one, the Switch 45. You don't see that very often. A cool point fighting karate technique that you'll see Kyoji Horiguchi use sometimes, Raymond Daniels, people like that. If you are in an orthodox stance, you take a step out to your left with your lead foot, which is your left foot. So you've squared your stance a little bit, and you've taken a step out to the left. You then step your right foot forward so that you're stepping in towards the opponent, but you're coming from slightly off to the side. So you're coming in from almost a 45-degree angle. It's a way to advance and change stances and do it in motion. And normally that's a cool way to set something up. Like Kyoji Horiguchi will do a leaping knee off it. Typical point fighting application is to come in with like a quick 1-2 or a nice high kick or something like that, or a front kick. But Cater used it about 100 times in this fight. In fact, I'm going to tell you to watch this fight again after we talked about it. But right from the get-go, he's using it to shut off Giga Chikadze's left leg when he goes southpaw. So when Giga goes southpaw, Kattar will take a little step out to his left with his left foot, taking him away from the kick a little bit, and then he'll advance his right foot and step into a southpaw stance so that if Giga kicks while he's coming in, the kick's going to go into his back rather than into the front of his liver. And this is the difference between like being able to take a kick well and getting hurt. You know, you see some guys in Muay Thai who can take amazing kicks on the body and just sort of like no sell it. But the difference from the most part, like if you are a normal human being and you want to take a kick, because you've seen guys catch kicks on their body and wrap the arm over the top, and there isn't like a block there first. And the way guys do it is that they take it on the body and they also move away from the kick. But sorry, they take it on the back of the body and they move away from the kick. If you take it on the front of the body, you're a little bit more dead to rights. It's like being able to roll or turn with a punch. You are turning with the kick and taking it across the back. I mean, think of pro wrestling with the steel chair. Where do they get hit with the steel chair? Used to be in the head because fucking madmen. Ken Shamrock and The Rock trading like headshots with chairs back in the day. Very scary stuff, knowing what we know now. Or the number that Benoit took in his lengthy career. But the classic chair shot is across the back, and that is one where, you know, for the most part, it's not going to hurt you. You know, it'll sting like a big slap across the back or something like that. But it's your natural reaction to things too, to turn your back on them because you've got a big, thick, muscly, bony structure in the way, as opposed to your flimsy ass ribs over your tender ass liver. So that switch 45, you'll see it over and over again. First 2 rounds he does it tons, and then in the 5th round he comes out and does it straight off the bat because he knows Giga's going to try and load up and kick him. And there are a lot of applications of that. He does he does things where he circles off to the left and just trails his right leg up behind him, so he's sort of retreating into a southpaw stance. But the switch 45 is very much a dart out to the side and then advance in a different stance. So that was very, very cool, and it worked very well. It enabled him to get in on top of Giga without like walking onto the kick to the liver. And there was lots of jabbing and stuff. And now, obviously, Max Holloway has been brought up a lot in connection with this fight because he kicked Calvin Kattar's ass so handily, but also because Kattar came out and put on amazing volume and pace on Chikadze, and it was like he'd been on on one end of the Max Holloway fight and gone, yeah, I want to try this from the other side. But there was more than that there too, because there were specifically connections between this fight and the Holloway-Rodriguez fight, because Rodriguez is also very kick-heavy, very labor-intensive, fights like a wild man like Chikadze does. Chikadze's a lower-pace fighter generally, but the case was always like, if someone backs this guy up, they're going to be able to punish him for just the choices he makes, the reliance on kicking, and tire him out and keep him on the back foot. And the thing about the Yair Rodriguez-Max Holloway fight was that I was really impressed by Yair Rodriguez's ability to fight a bad strategic fight, and still both him and Chikadze had the idea that if the guy keeps trying to press in on me, I'm just going to try and hit him as hard as possible to get him off me, which is a very standard reaction because, you know, you can't run forever. And it's exhausting to keep circling out. But Rodriguez actually did a pretty good job of making Max respect him. Max managed to drive up the pace, but not in the same sort of like disdainful way that Kattar did, where he just didn't give a shit what was coming back mostly. But I think a big difference in this fight and the Holloway-Kattar one, sorry, the Holloway-Rodriguez one, was obviously the wrestling. Now, I said this on the Boycast. I was like, Calvin Kattar needs to drop the best boxer in MMA bullshit. You know, it's a great way to make Twitter engagement. Be like, oh, I'm the best boxer in the UFC. You know, oh, let's have a vote for options because you can only ever put 4 on a Twitter poll. And that's great that the UFC can do that with you on there because you've said you're the best boxer in the UFC. You've had some nice boxing performances. But anytime you get down that rabbit hole, you lose sight of the fact that it's not boxing. It's a different fucking sport. You know, Max Holloway is considered one of the finest strikers in the UFC, starts having trouble against Yair Rodriguez because Yair Rodriguez, for all his tactical and strategic shortcomings, is a specimen, like mechanically and athletically, in the striking. So Max has to beat him on the ground, and Max does not pursue a lot of takedowns. He landed like a couple of good ones in that fight, but generally he doesn't go for him, which is one of the big differences with someone like Volkanovski, who goes even with Max Holloway. I'm saying even, get angry in the comments as to which one you felt won both fights or either fight, but goes even with Holloway on the feet, and then will use takedowns throughout the fight, and not just like when he desperately needs to. And it's such a fucking powerful weapon to be able to do that. Like, good strikers become better strikers in MMA when they can level change and go into clinches and hit takedown attempts. Calvin Kattar was able to duck in on clinches or duck in on single legs a lot of the time in this fight, and force up the pace, change where the fight's taking place, take a break from getting hit in the head. If he ever got hit in the head and he was like, oh, I didn't enjoy that one, he could duck in on a single leg. If he wanted to kill time, he was in the clinch. If he got top position, he'd won the round, basically. But like Chikadze, this is the difference. If you watch an elite boxer when they're getting pressure cooked by, a pressure fighter, they tie up. It's a vital part of the boxing game. It's a vital part of being able to shut someone off. If they're a good combination puncher and they come in on the inside, you smother them, the referee breaks you, you move back out. Now, you don't get broken by the referee in MMA a lot of the time. I mean, you can, but we all remember Alonzo Menifield versus Will Knight from the other month. It does take too long for the ref to break you. But in MMA, you can threaten takedowns. You can break the clinch on your own terms. You can hit on breaks. You could use the clinch to land some good knees if you're a good striker who's not particularly interested in pursuing the takedown. But you can use that clinch to smother the forward pressure. Giga Chikadze never went for that. Yair Rodriguez, I think, might have gone for it once, but for the most part, did not go for that. And I think that's something that people are going to overlook. Like, that was something that could have helped Giga enormously in this fight, even if he wasn't the better wrestler. Calvin Kattar has the wrestling background, which obviously people will point to and say, well, you can't wrestle with a better wrestler. Yeah, you absolutely can. I mean, Chikadze was stopping a lot of takedowns. He was breaking from a lot of clinches. If he'd made the clinch on his own terms, I imagine he could have kept himself standing. But what you saw from Chikadze was trying to use ring craft and circle out. I mean, he wasn't particularly ring aware because he ends up on the fence a lot, like you saw against Edson Barboza. But more than that, that's not what kickboxing is. If you watch boxing, you'll see guys circling the ring and using footwork and so on. Like, Holly Holm is the great example in MMA because of what she did to Rousey, but she'd been doing that in boxing too. Like, a lot of her boxing career is like bouncing around the outside of the ring, walking with combinations. Not at all like men's boxing, really. So it's a bit weird that she had so much success, but then that was the state of women's boxing at the time. But she had a very big kickboxing influence because her coach was a kickboxing coach / MMA striking coach. However, she did a lot of fucking circling of the ring. If you watch high-level kickboxing, like Glory, I said on the Boycast, I was watching Chikadze's fights with Kevin Vannestrand, who's a very weird fighter, weird sort of like Kempo-influenced guy. But that one, Vannestrand tries to run a pace on him and does well keeping Chikadze on the back foot, but Chikadze just sort of stands there and takes blows with his guard up, as is the standard in kickboxing. I've said the ridiculous extreme of it is Robin van Roosmalen, who was #1 featherweight in the world for quite a time. But his game was to put on the earmuffs, take a combination, and come back with a longer combination faster. Defense in kickboxing is, particularly Dutch-influenced kickboxing, is not great. It's not very heavily based on movement. It's more based on the size of the gloves and covering up. Now, Chikadze, obviously, he's been training with Cordero forever. He comes from a Kyokushin karate background, I think. But if you watch him in Glory, he doesn't break the mold particularly. He is he's still quite a low output fighter, slightly higher output than he does in MMA, but it's not huge amounts of movement. He's not Giorgio Petrosian, the sort of one guy bucking the trend of not using your fucking feet to defend yourself. So yeah, he's not a guy who's used to having to run around the ring to defend himself, to use ring craft and so on. And if you have to do that after every exchange or after every kick, that's very quickly going to tire you out. And that's what you saw in this fight. Never ducked in on a clinch on his own terms, always punching as hard as he can to try and get Calvin Kattar off him or knock him out, or running. And I'm not saying running in the cowardly sense. There's a lot of stuff attached to the word running, but you know what I mean, getting on his bike, trying to make space. And that's the interesting part, because I saw a lot of people afterwards saying, well, Kattar couldn't have done that if he wasn't as tough as he is, and he wasn't didn't have that great chin. And yeah, no, I don't think you can apply a pressure game plan and be defensively perfect. It's very, very hard to do. But it's a fight. Fight's a fight. And one of the interesting things about pressure particularly is that Yeah, ideally, you want to be hitting the other guy more than he's hitting you. If you're running a pressure game plan, or if you're running any kind of game plan, you want to be hitting them more than they're hitting you because you don't really want to get hit that much. But one of the interesting things about like pressure is that there's a lot of meanings to it. Pressure can be huge amounts of volume. I mean, it can be, but pressure can also just be making the other guy work. If you're only throwing like jabs and short, flicking right straights and switching stances, like a lot of what Kattar was doing in this fight, and the other guy is trying to blast you every time he sets his feet and tries to punch, and then he's got to run out to the side and do it again. He's spending a lot more energy than you, and it doesn't matter if you're not hurting him with big punches. You're hurting his gas tank, and you're going to get him later, or you're going to start to be able to hit him more later. But then Kattar was able to mix in more powerful blows and more effective blows, and I thought he adapted really well to what Chikadze was doing. Like, there was a bit in the end of the first round where Chikadze ducks a right hand and a left hook and then like another right hand. And he bends at the waist to duck it, and then he tries to run out the side door again. And then the immediate exchange after that, Kattar walks up to him as if to throw his hands again. Chikadze ducks forward, Kattar knees him in the chin. And he like gets away. I mean, that could have been much worse for Chikadze, but he did knee him in the chin. And you saw him try that like several more times throughout the fight. He'd throw his hands, he'd realise that Chikadze was ducking, he'd throw the knee or the uppercut. And the great thing about that is, of course, you then make the guy stand upright for the next exchange. He's not going to go immediately back to ducking because you might take his fucking head off. So he stands up, you hit him with straight punches or you hit him with elbows, as Kattar was doing throughout this fight. I thought it was beautiful when Kattar, he kept the pressure up. He made Chikadze work. Chikadze would try and bang back and then he'd run, and then he'd try and bang back and then he'd run. And then Kattar would get the feel for it and go, okay, he's coming back at me this time. And he'd give Chikadze basically enough rope to hang himself. He'd go, oh, okay, I'm stepping back now. Or fight might be turning around, and then he'd spin into the elbow and hit him in the face, which is the perfect application of the back elbow. Pressure, take the pressure off, back elbow. Or you can use it on the back foot and be like, I'm being pressured, and then back elbow. Or you can be Ricardo Ramos and be like, oh, there's an exchange happening, back elbow. So I thought that was lovely. The single leg. Well, actually, let's talk about first the slip. Lots of people being like, oh, it was a slip. The slip cost him, so on. Giga did get on Facebook from the hospital with his face looking like shit, having taken a photo with Kattar, who looks like he's not been in a fight. I mean, he looks like a guy who's been in some fights because his nose is fucking all over his face, but he doesn't look like he got hit recently at all. So they took a photo, and then Giga Chikadze gets on Facebook Live and is like, I think 99 times out of 100 I win that fight, and that was just the one time that I didn't. Which is, you could say that if you got caught in the first round or something like that, but you got battered for 5 rounds. Really unlikable guy, Giga Chikadze, but, like I said, I wouldn't want to be the 4-foot-tall bantamweight he rebounds against. Now, when you're talking about takedowns, a takedown is a means to an end. Takedowns, I mean, the judging is not supposed to score takedowns that don't do anything, but they do. The judging, don't even bother reading judging criteria because the judges don't. You know how fights are scored. You know what they're going to value. But at the end of the day, the takedown, the purpose of it is to get the guy on the ground. And in kickboxing, guys are on the ground all the time. In Muay Thai, guys are on the ground all the time because when you kick, you put yourself at a good risk of being pushed over. Now, there are instances like MVP versus Lima where you catch a guy on one leg, you run shoulder first into him and knock him over. You didn't do anything with the knockdown, and you didn't do anything in terms of hurting him to cause a knockdown. You caught him off balance and then you let him up. That's not really doing anything. But there have been fights turned around in MMA just on bundling people over, and there were loads on this card. This one, the co-main with Collier versus Sherman. Sherman throws a kick. Actually, we'll get into that in a minute, but this one, Chikadze threw a kick, threw a punch, missed a high kick, fell over, and Kattar immediately got on him, which is exactly what you want to see. And Kattar won the rest of that round. And if you watch that round, most of it was spent in half guard. Giga rolled the turtle at one point. Kattar almost took his back. He rolled back to half guard on the other side. Chikadze grabbed a guillotine from half guard and had a little crank on it, but Kattar passed and threatened the Von Flue, so he had to give that up. It was just top control from Kattar and Giga occasionally trying to escape. And he was doing a lot of work on the wrist and trying to get to his hands and knees, which is important, so he was trying to get up. But if you saw him at the end of that first round, Giga already looked absolutely bollocksed, which is really important because we said, no one since the lower quality opponents he fought, no one's tried to take him down. Cub Swanson and Edson Barboza attempted 0 takedowns each. Didn't even threaten it. Didn't even tap his leg and then throw an overhand. Like that's how you use takedowns in MMA if you're a striker. You just slap their fucking leg and throw an overhand. Regional champion Gegard Mousasi lost to Alexander Shlemenko, who is a 50-year-old welterweight, because Shlemenko kept slapping his leg and then throwing the overhand. Of course, the Bellator judges gave it as a win, but we're talking about like actual wins and losses. But we're going to be talking about that more later, like using kicks to get people down. Bontorin versus Royval is a really important example of that. So I'll leave that one hanging there and we'll come back around to it. But I thought that was a good start to the fight. Like if the guy kicks loads and then he falls over, he doesn't get to complain that like, oh, I wouldn't have lost if it weren't for that slip. Fucking kick less. You fall over all the time in kickboxing. It's just that you did it in MMA and the guy was allowed to get on top of you. It's kind of like why I don't respect the Rolling Thunder in anything except MMA. The Rolling Thunder, people are mad about it in kickboxing because Tenshin does it all the time. But he also does it to get fucking breathers, like against Rodtang. He also double-legged Rodtang and then laid on top of him for like 15 seconds while the ref was like, oh, I'm sure that was a mistake. Everyone up. But the Rolling Thunder is a kick where it's like if I threw a punch and then threw myself to the floor and there was no penalty for it and the ref didn't stop time in boxing. But in MMA, if you attempt a Rolling Thunder, the other guy can get on top of you. And then I respect that. Moves where you do something and the other guy is forbidden from hitting you as a result. Pretty lame. Anyway, returning to Kattar versus Chikadze. Single legs were dope in this fight. Lovely little short level changes onto the single leg. And then a couple of different attacks off it. Really nice. The one where Chikadze grabbed the cage was sus as hell. But that was where he picked up the single, had it between his legs, walked backwards off the fence and pulled the leg down towards the floor and switched onto the body lock. So he just like dragged Chikadze through his legs and came up and grabbed the body lock. Really nice. Chikadze turned and fought the hands off well, though. That was something I was very impressed with by Chikadze in this fight. Whenever he turned his back, he was pretty good at separating the hands and getting away. He is quite hard to take down, but like the act of pursuing the takedowns and showing the takedowns messed him up in this fight, even if the takedowns themselves didn't always. And the other one that Kay was using was he'd pick up the leg and then he'd move in towards the opponent and hoist the leg up into his armpit. And that's like Jim... Fuck, what's his name? Not Jim Jordan. He's the senator who covered up child molestation. Jeff Jordan, his brother. They were both very successful wrestlers. But Jeff Jordan... he has this, is it Graham High School? Spelt Graham, but Graham High School. He had a very successful wrestling team where they used to use this sweep single, or I think they still do, where they pull the guy down to the mat. But he said, like, the reason they do that is because against elite wrestlers, it's very hard to get the leg up. Because once you get the leg from between your legs, like pinched between your thighs, to up under your armpit, his words, like your chances of getting the guy down increase to like 80%. So when you get on a single, get the leg as high as possible is always a good shout. But then there are guys who are good at backflipping out of that shit too. So you never know. But that was nice. Like Kattar kept pulling the leg up really high and threatening to topple him over. It was a lovely... He did that in one of the rounds and he was able to... Chikadze was on one leg swinging back at him and doing quite a good job of keeping his balance. But because Kattar got the leg high, he was able to grab Chikadze's head and like kick out his standing leg. Get on top. And then the elbows were beautiful. We touched on the back elbows, but just generally loads of elbows folding over. Last round, he just goes mental, trying to elbow his face off. And if you saw Chikadze's face at the end of the fifth and afterwards, like I'm always saying women's MMA needs more elbows. But like if you don't have a ton of upper body power, elbows still cut people up. And cuts are really valuable. Like, even if back in the day, people used to get mad at Kenny Florian because he was the only guy who could use elbows well on the feet. They'd be like, but he's just getting cuts. TKO by cuts is awful. I hate it. Stop stopping fights because of cuts. And I know cuts are really important because if you cut someone above the brow and the blood goes in their eye, you can hit them for free. They can't see it coming. And the reason that fights are stopped there is because often in boxing, guys do just get like absolutely murked from there because they can't see because they're blinking blood out of their eye. But yeah, brilliant performance by Kattar. Just, I mean, did exactly what we said he needed to. Just be rounded. Just show a bit of everything. You know, you don't have to be the best boxer in the UFC. You don't have to meet this guy kickboxing for kickboxing. You can benefit from kicking him, which he did. He got loads of kicks off, and that's another great thing about like applying pressure to a kicker. You keep him on the back foot. You can kick while going forwards. Harder for them to kick while going back. Now, kicking while going back is something that always pisses people off when I say it, because yes, you can actually kick while going back. I'm doing a Advanced Striking 2.0 on Volkanovski at the moment, and he has mastered sliding back and kicking the lead leg from outside. That's how he buckles guys' legs in as they step in on him. But it's a timing thing. You are stepping back and then kicking, because at some point you have to get on one leg, and you can't do that if you're in the process of retreating the entire time, and if you're worried about the guy stepping in on you while you're kicking. So Katie used some lovely front kicks to the body in this one. They sort of snuck through. No one really talked about them because obviously the elbows were so much more impressive and the jab was taking Giga's face off. But yeah, never be afraid to kick with a better kicker. It's the case is you don't want them kicking you. You're allowed to kick them. So yeah, great fight. Really enjoyed it. Excellent start to the year, and mad respect to Calvin Kattar for coming back and showing that there was more to him than that Holloway fight. And I think he looked a lot better than I've seen him in a while, like against Ige and people like that. He was getting obsessed with his hands, and honestly, his hands will land better if he just does other stuff as well. Everything benefits from, like, there is no place in MMA where variety is a weakness. I mean, you could say, like, in training for more things as opposed to training for fewer things is a disadvantage. But, like, if you have more weapons you can use offensively, that's never a disadvantage. Also, like, there's just, no matter how good you think you are as a boxer or kickboxer in an MMA context, if I put you in the ring with Cyril Diabate, he's a classic example from back in the day, and you don't take the easy takedown at some point, you're an idiot. And you're playing fast and loose with your paycheck / the paycheck that feeds your family if you've got a child or a wife or anything like that. So what else was going on? Jake Collier versus Chase Sherman. I like Jake Collier. We talked about this on the Boycast, but he looked scary at middleweight, and now he looks like a jolly fat man. He always looks like awkward about being there now. He went from looking like Nicky Rod to this. Very strange. Like, clearly something is going on negatively in his life. I imagine he was probably one of those, I mean, I've not looked into it, but I imagine he was probably one of those guys who was fat, lost a lot of weight through MMA, and then has since got fat again. Because him getting fat, coincided with the start of the pandemic, and probably didn't have any lockdown wherever he is in the United States. But, everyone was at home eating takeaway for, every other meal, or just snacking to make themselves feel better. And I imagine that's probably what happened to him. But, someone needs to step in, because, cutting to 260 is not good. There is no healthy 260 man in the world, probably. I mean, in professional sports, there are 260-pound men who are jacked, but they are also on, a concoction of steroids or human growth hormones, so it's not that healthy. And also, the bigger you get, the harder it is on your joints. Every former NBA player, every world's tallest man, the world's tallest man ever, that's a really sad story, died at 28 from an infection from rubbing of his knee sleeves. The guy was in chronic pain, and he was only 28. But yeah, the bigger you get, the more hard it is on your body. But there aren't healthy 260-pound men, and especially there are guys who are jacked at 250, and that's sus in its own right, Rico Verhoeven and Garn and Garnu. But Chase Sherman is not even close to jacked at 260, and he cuts to make the weight. Someone needs to step in and sort his life out. And it's really weird because, he's fast at heavyweight. He's a better technician than a lot of these heavyweights. I mean, he'd still got smashed by Aspinall, but Aspinall's an actual heavyweight and an actual talent. But he's the sort of guy where you're there should be a place for you at light heavyweight. If you don't like cutting all the way down to middleweight, we should be able to get you to light heavyweight and you be fast and powerful there. And it's such a weak weight class too. But no, he's just a portly mess of a person at the moment. But he does fight quite fun. He's got good hands. His fight with Gian Villante was really funny because they're both fat, but Gian Villante's fat and wearing it. Like he's really like struggling to do anything useful. But Collier's actually surprisingly fast for a neat feat for a big lad, as they always say in football. But this one, he opens up with punches. He throws about 5 in a row, which is nice because you never see that at heavyweight. He looked like Andy Ruiz, the fatty with the fast hands, my favorite heavyweight prototype for a fighter. They come in and you're like, yeah, well, what's this fatty going to do? And they're actually much faster than you because under the fat, they're a much smaller person. Plus, and they've been training with heavyweights the entire time, so they get stronger and are used to dealing with heavyweights, as opposed to people who are coming up and then just are horrified by how strong actual heavyweights are. But Sherman throws a step-up left kick and gets pushed over. And that's as good as the end of the fight because Collier gets on top of him, puts the belly down, gets into half guard, passes all the way to like 3/4 mount. And Chase Sherman turns his back as if to quad pod up. We have been worshipping the quad pod recently, and the quad pod was awesome in the Royval Bontorin fight as well. But he goes to quad pod up and he just can't. He like buckles under the weight of Collier, and Collier rear naked chokes him. That's the thing about dudes who are 260. Probably not shaking them off your back very easily. If you go to your hands and knees against a heavyweight, you're going to get your back blown out. That's what I'm saying. Enjoy that thought. Now, moving on. The other good fight of the night was Rogerio Bontorin versus Brandon Royval. Well, firstly, fake tap, Brazilian tap. I mean, it's called the Brazilian tap, but Matt Lindland is probably the most famous person for using it. The old, if the ref doesn't see the tap and the other guy lets go, the fight continues, which is why you see guys attempt it typically on the other side to where the ref is. Most recently, Stunt Double Verdum beat Real Verdum by doing it. And I don't know if they did the rematch yet, but a guy who played Verdum in the film fought Verdum in PFL. What's his name? Henan Ferreira or something like that. But he's got an amazing reach. He's got like an 86-inch reach. But Verdum gets him, I think it was in a triangle. The guy gives him a Brazilian tap. Verdum lets go, and the guy pounds him out because the ref didn't see it. So, yeah, well done to Royval for holding on. I mean, it does just encourage people to, like, break your limbs, though. It encourages people to be Palhares. It's a very fine line, because if you get an armbar on someone in MMA, and it's been a hard fight, you know, if you let go of it, they're on top of you, pounding you. So, yeah, why not crank the absolute shit out of it? Mad respect to people who release them and look after their opponents, because it's something that, you know, I wouldn't do. If I were in an actual fight, I'd be like, no, fuck it, breaking this arm in half, and then I can apologize afterwards. You know, even Gordon Ryan, best grappler in the world, he had a match against Roberto Jimenez, the other, well, that was sometime last year, and he mounts him, gets an armbar, he's working through it all very systematically, very methodically, keeps him completely under control, and just because he won't snap this guy's arm, the guy wriggles out. So the next time he puts it on and he really does crank it, and then the guy's like, ah, and screams. And Gordon's like, well, I'm sorry, I already did it once and you escaped because I didn't crank it. But this Bontorin Royval fight, we were looking forward to it ahead of time on the Boycast. And I was talking about, like, one of my favorite things about Royval is how he makes scrambles and he continues the fight and he makes action happen. And it makes it harder to score things. But I said, like, he's been fighting people like Moreno and Pantoja, who are very much like box to your back sort of guys. It's a very common thing in the flyweight division for some reason. Guys will shoot a takedown and shuck to the back. Or duck in on a clinch and shuck to the back. Or do the Ricardo Ramos box, duck under to the back. But Bontorin's more in the classical mold where he gets the takedown and he sits in your guard. And the difference between that and a guy who wants to get on your back can be night and day, because Royval has these scrambly-ass fights. Harder to do that with the guy sitting in your guard, and every time you try and stand up, he's going to hold your legs so you can't get off the mat. Or worse, sitting in half guard, which everyone rightly says, oh, I mean, you can get more sweeps from half guard than you can from closed guard, but also the guy can sit on one of your legs and just elbow your head. So I said I'd be very interested to see how Royval does against a fighter like that, and if he gets to closed guard, I expect him to, because I've seen him do it before, but I expect him to turn his back and stand up, which from a tactical standpoint, with nothing else attached, no time limits, no anything, bad. But from a fight standpoint, when you consider that this is a sport with time limits and scores, it's very important that more guys do this. Because if you give up your back standing up like a back body lock, that's a position where you're on your feet and you're fighting. and it's very hard to score like what's going on if you're rolling around all over the place, like Royval always does. Very easy for judges to look at a guy on top of another guy in closed guard, even if the guy from the bottom's like working his knees and attacking triangles and things. Very easy for them to look at that and go, guy on the bottom's losing. And if you're on the bottom for 3 minutes of a round, you have lost that round. Almost without exception, unless you knock the guy silly in 2 minutes, like at the start of the fight, and then you get taken down. So wouldn't you know it, this fight happens, and every time that Royval's taken down into closed guard, he immediately opens his legs, gets to a hip, pushes away with one hand, and stands up. And every time he does it, he basically gives up back body lock, but then he can roll through on the legs, or just Granby through and break Bontorin's grip and get free. Now, one of the interesting things in this fight was Bontorin, because it's one thing to pass the guard of someone who's trying to hold guard, but when you're trying to hold someone down and pass guard, it's like trying to change a nappy. It's a different level of difficult. And what you saw in this one was like Bontorin would get a body lock on the feet and trip Royval to the ground, so he'd be past the guard, or he'd pass the guard with a body lock, so hands locked around Royval's waist, and then once you're past the guard and you're in side control, having your hands locked around the guy's waist is kind of a weight on your shoulders. It's kind of a burden, because you have to switch from controlling his hips to controlling his upper body. And this is something that's coming up a lot in the grappling world at the moment, because body lock passing has really come back into vogue over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. So if you go and watch that Royval fight again, the first sort of trip that Bontorin hits, where he lands in side control with his hands locked around Royval's waist, the difficulty there is that if you're not controlling the guy's upper body, he can start rolling up into the turtle, or making life difficult for you, or his hands are always in front of your arms, so he can start shrimping back in the moment you let go. And the thing is that you have to transfer from that grip around his waist to an upper body grip, and in that moment that you're transferring, you don't have control, and he's going to freak out and get out of there. And that's what you saw in this fight. Like, he was holding that for quite a while, waiting for a chance to go after to switch and grab Royval's head. And it happened a couple of times from different starting points. Trip from the feet, pass on the ground, but he still ended up there with his hands locked around Royval's waist and nowhere really to go, because then it's just sort of like a race to get upper body control. This was also a great fight for K-guard / K control in MMA, which is becoming a bigger thing. It was huge in Minna versus Ryan Hall. We pointed it out way back when Rafael Lovato dominated Gegard Mousasi for 7 rounds or whatever it was. That fight was actually pretty close. But Lovato gassed out and used it as a position to keep himself safe while Mousasi was on top of him. But the K-guard has been big since... Neil Melanson was teaching it back in the day. He wrote a book with it in and was like, Caro Parisian used this against Georges St-Pierre. And when Caro Parisian used it against Georges St-Pierre couldn't hit him. But then Caro Parisian stopped doing it and went back into a normal closed guard, and St-Pierre pounded him out. But then Lachlan Giles famously used it to beat 3 heavyweights in the ADCC Absolute division, including the heavyweight champion that year. But it's basically like, when you watch someone in closed guard and they reach underneath the thigh, like Oliveira often does to spin into an armbar, or Fedor does, instead of doing that, you work your knees in front of the guy and you try and invert on his leg, so you skip the arm altogether, and you take the arm if it's there, like Ryan Hall was doing that against Minna. He was going for the leg, but if Minna's arm was still in, he'd throw his legs over for the armbar, and you saw that in this one too, and then you turn upside down and go for the leg. And there were loads of times when this happened in this fight. It was really cool. There was also a lovely bit from half guard where Royval got his knee shield in, and instead of like trying to hold him or set anything up, he just put his feet on Bontorin's chest and kicked him away. And that's something that you'll see Gordon Ryan do in BJJ. Like, if they aren't giving him any pressure from his knee shield, he will just hoof them in the chest and come up on top. It was also Bas Rutten's go-to BJJ sweep. Well, not sweep, but get up. He just put his feet on their chest and kicked him out. Ben Saunders used to be good at that too. It's one that you don't get to practice too much, like in pure grappling, because it's hard to not put force on it, because you're trying to leg press the guy, but you're doing it fast, so you can end up just kicking him in the chest. But in MMA, obviously, you can absolutely do that. If you wind him on the way up, even better. The only other thing that I wanted to mention was the fucking go-go platters that he was going for. Man, firstly, great example of rubber guard being used well in MMA, which is, you got to save it because, like, every now and again, there is an argument about it. Like, if rubber guard worked, why have we never seen it in MMA like Eddie Bravo said we would? There are some guys who still do sort of use it. But anytime I see someone's fucking foot coming up towards their chest, bending their knee side or putting lateral pressure on their knee, my knees scream at me. You can blow out your MCL very easily doing that. I mean, I've used Gordon Ryan as an example twice already today, but like best grappler in the world, blew out his own knee because he was underneath a guy trying to attack the leg from the saddle, and he was putting pressure into his leg sideways. He was pushing the guy away with his leg, with his foot into his chest, and his knee just blew out underneath him. And he still doesn't like sweeping guys off one side as much as the other because his knee was blown up. So really strong grappling fight. Some people thought that Bontorin should have won. I mean, it was a split decision, so one of the judges thought that Bontorin should have won. I just didn't see an awful lot out of him. Oh, sorry, I didn't even talk about the striking on the feet. Lots of what we talked about on the Boycast. Royval going southpaw, jabbing, pulling, and looking for the check hook, or the counter right hook, or whatever you want to call it. But also jabbing, pulling, and looking for the lead elbow, which I love. He did that against Pantoja. But Pantoja's not really the guy to catch that with, because Pantoja is really 1-2s, the odd body kick, staying safe. You need someone who's going to swing back at you, and Bontorin was that guy. But it was more measured on the feet from Royval, and I don't know if that worked as well as it could have. I mean, it's very much a new style for him, but you could see, like, he was concerned about Bontorin's ability to hold him down. Not to threaten him with submissions, because, like, Pantoja and Moreno are very dangerous submission threats, but he was worried about getting taken down and losing the round on time. So he's being much more cautious with his stand-up. And I think he ended up looking worse as a result. But yeah, I do sort of agree. Like, if you run out and try and do like Andy Risty marching knees against a guy who just wants to take you down, yeah, maybe you take his head off on the level change, but you are giving him a free takedown every time you're on one leg, if you don't knock him out. So what else was on that card? Fucking Chikadze versus Jennifer Maia. I'm not going to say a word about that, but that was Chikadze's last fight on her contract. I would send her to Bellator deliberately if I were them. Oh, sorry, Borshev versus Bush was a fun one. This was another one where it's like, if I keep the pace really high, this guy won't hit me. And he did it, and then he ran out of steam, and like 2 good body shots put him down. And yeah, that was about it for fights I liked from that. So let's do a question, and then we'll get out of here for this week. My boy Blaine from Fight Library says, "Sup, fucker. Question for the pod. Last episode you talked about rules of thumb and how they're guides and not set in stone. You used the example of the outside foot position in southpaw versus an orthodox matchup. You mentioned the inside foot position has been used successfully. What are some ways the inside angle is used well? How can a fighter mix it up with the outside and inside to fluster an opponent? Deontay Wilder's superb boxing skills, bless." This might have been on the Boycast. I was talking about this, but I was just talking about like rules of thumb, and then I got into like how I realized that I've been doing this for 10 years because I joined Twitter in January 2012. But I said, like, I used to talk more about rules of thumb. Well, firstly, you grow and learn as an individual, but also like back in the day, I was dealing with, there wasn't an awful lot of technical writing or technical analysis around. Nowadays, you've got loads of guys out there doing it, giving thoughtful takes, and there's a whole sort of language that is built up around it. And obviously, I moan about nomenclature all the time, like calling something one thing and then getting upset about people calling it another. There was a very famous one where there's a huge argument between 2 journalists about question mark kick versus Brazilian kick. And of course, both are fine. Like, it doesn't fucking matter. It's a maha mawashigeri. Get it right. But nowadays, there are all sorts of people doing it, and they all have their own processes, but there is a sort of language we use, and we all understand each other. And you don't need to talk about like the basic stuff so much anymore. I used to do things like the Southpaw Guide, which was basically just like, here's all the things you can do with the outside angle, or like the most important things you can do with the outside angle. Here's the basics of hand fighting. And obviously, like, the more you learn and the more you study, the more you're going to see, like, obviously there's not just one way to do things. And because if you just do the same thing over and over again, it's not that sort of sport. It's if they do that, I can do this. Or if they're very prone to doing that, I can do this and probably catch them. Every habit you cultivate opens you up in other areas if people have studied you and said, oh, well, look, when he fights southpaws, he always tries to step to the outside angle to a fault. So the outside angle is a great example, and I used that on the last podcast. Like, there are so many guys who do really good work off the inside angle, and it's not a new. I mean, it is sort of a newer thing in terms of like wider boxing. But if you watch Benny Leonard versus Lou Tendler, we've only got one of their fights on film, and we've only got a bit of it. But Benny Leonard was a wizard, and that's like the only footage of him at his best. And I believe Tendler was the first southpaw to ever challenge for a world title, because back in the day, obviously, southpaws had a bit of a thing attached to them. Lots of coaches didn't want to train them because it's different and weird, and lots of fight fans felt that they brought boring fights. Promoters didn't like him either. But Lou Tendler fucking sparked everyone with his left hand, so they had to give him good fights, and he worked his way up to Leonard, and they had two great fights. I think he took a load of Leonard's teeth out in the first one. They had a couple of real barn burners. And if you watch the fight, like, Tendler is good in his own right. You're watching him going, yeah, actually, you know, even if Benny Leonard's not used to fighting southpaws, this guy's doing a good job boxing against Benny Leonard. But Leonard in that fight is always circling around to his right side. So, traditionally, if you're a southpaw trying to throw your left hand at the opponent, trying to step down the outside angle and throw your power hand, you're moving to their left, and Leonard's circling the other way. So he's not even like trying to confront him in that angle and trying to get outside of Tendler's lead foot. He's circling off. And there's a great clip that I often repost, but it's Leonard doing the open side counter, which is where, say you're fighting a southpaw, they throw their left straight at you, you retreat to your right side and throw your right hand over the top. So if you switch all that around to the opposite side, that's what Conor McGregor does so often, or did so often when he was winning fights. And is what Wonder Boy does, and Tenshin Nasukawa is very good at it. It's a great little... You turn the fight into gunslinging because it's southpaw versus orthodox, and you're asking them to throw their rear hand, and then you're going to go, okay, well, your rear hand's fallen short, I'm going to throw my rear hand. You know, it's a real slug it out sort of counter, but it works really well. And Leonard did it 100 years ago. You know, you can go watch the footage of him doing it a full fucking century ago. And that would be an application of the inside angle on defense. You're circling to the inside of their lead foot. And Henry Cejudo basically changed his whole career when he started doing that to southpaws. Like, if you watch his fight against Wilson Hayes, it's constant. He's circling off and spiraling to the inside of Hayes' lead foot and battering him every time that he turns to face him. And that's the great thing about that spiraling outwards to the inside angle. The guy will keep turning to face you, and you can keep shooting straights down the middle or throwing round kicks. And this is sort of like Giorgio Petrosian stuff. He tends to do it on the outside pivot, but he'll turn, and as the opponent turns, their elbow comes away from their body and he digs in a kick. Or he'll turn and they've just been kicked in the body off the same move, so they'll keep everything tight to their sides and he'll punch down the center. But on offense, the inside angle, you know, you very famously see it from Manny Pacquiao, because he wants to hit with both hands frequently. What he tends to do is, like, he'll step to the inside angle, he'll jab, left straight to the body, right up, jab, left straight again, and he'll like weave out to his left off that side. And he gets in so many fucking punches that way. You know, when you go down the outside angle, yeah, you can sort of hit with both hands, but you are also placing the guy's shoulder and shoulder line between their chin and your right hand, or your lead hand rather. As a southpaw, or you know, your lead hand is either stance, but you're placing their chin between their hand and you. You're putting their shoulder line down your chest. But if you step to the inside angle, you're basically stepping round and coming up towards their belly button and pushing them back towards where their stance is weak. So Manny Pacquiao, if you watch him putting in those 4-punch bursts, he's often stepping to the inside angle. Pacquiao also does a great left overhand, stepping off to his left side as the opponent comes in. The one he knocked down Hatton with. And the one that Mir copied and did against Czech Congo, allegedly. Or that's where he said he got it from. Another great example is using the inside angle to land the lead hook. So if you watch Miguel Cotto, great left hooker, fought Sergio Martinez, great southpaw, went up in weight to do it. I think Martinez's knees were knackered by that time, but every time Cotto steps in, he steps deep with his left foot inside of Martinez's right foot. You know, it's the sort of position where if you've done any point fighting or Muay Thai, the guy will sweep your leg if you do that too often. But he swings the left hand like almost over the top a left hook coming in from like overhead, 12 o'clock, and he just keeps landing it. Martinez couldn't get away from it. And Andre Ward did that to Chad Dawson. Hang on, wait, fuck, who was it? Yeah, Chad Dawson. Inside angle, also a great position to knee from. Use the rear knee. If you step to the inside angle as the opponent's coming in, you can throw your hands over throw out leverage guards and hit the knee. These inside angle also, like takedown wise, John Smith low singles there. You can use the inside angle to set up the double leg on the far side. Body jabbing in a southpaw versus orthodox matchup. You can do it both ways, but like the inside angle is often very useful for that. And in boxing, you can step like across yourself and take a big step out to the side, so you score the point and get away. Guillermo Rigondeaux used to do that a lot. And that outside counter can also be extended. Like anytime you want to slip the opponent's rear hand and move in on them, the inside angle can help you because then you can come up on the inside with the uppercut afterwards. Gervonta Davis is as good at that. Tank. Yeah, just going off the top of my head, but there's a lot of things you can do from the inside angle. And it's obviously going to be very useful if you want to get in on a clinch with underhooks, get into the inside angle. The outside angle is very good for shooting your rear hand and your rear leg. And for a lot of people, that's a huge part of their game, either as a southpaw versus an orthodox or as an orthodox against a southpaw. But it's interesting because like in an orthodox versus orthodox match, like strictly from a boxing perspective, if you're both sort of half facing the old, blading your stance, and you've got your lead shoulder forward, and your shoulder is supposed to protect your chin on, if you're orthodox, the left side. If you put your shoulder on the opponent's center line, or if you've both got your shoulders in, you're like shoulder to shoulder orthodox. It's very hard for you to come over the top with right hands again, or rear hands against each other. Whereas when you're southpaw versus orthodox, both guys' rear hands are there for each other because your shoulder, you're not standing with your shoulder straight down the middle anymore. But the moment that you take a step outside the opponent's lead foot to throw your left hand, you do put their shoulder in between, like down the middle and in between your right hand and their chin again. But then you are effectively putting them in a bladed stance, perhaps against their will, or a more bladed position. So getting down the outside angle, you can throw the left hand or the left leg and pick up the single leg because you've put their leg inside of yours and down the center line. Or start trying to slide to the back like Rob Font did against Jose Aldo. But yeah, just got well into the weeds on something that I didn't show any footage of. So sorry, listeners at home. But I'll probably write something about it at a later date. That's probably... I'm doing all this advanced striking 2.0 stuff at the moment, but I'd like to get back into sort of like conceptual stuff again. So I'll just have to work out a way to frame that in like a collection that I like. Because I think it gets a bit much if I'm doing like an elementary striking 2.0 or whatever. Anyway, cheers, Blaine. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm going to be back midweek with the Boycast. We're going to be talking about Garn versus Ngarn. Ooh, and. I enjoyed saying that so much on the Boycast, I had to say it again. But, really fucking hyped for this fight. Can't wait. And there's a lot to be said, and I will be saying it. So if you want to get in on that, I'll probably leave some of it, I'll probably put some of it in the preview for the non-boys. But if you want to get in on the full discussion, me just wanking myself cross-eyed over two massive dudes who can actually fucking strike and have six-packs. And one of them can actually go 5 rounds. Get in on that. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Is Garn versus Ngannou Caitlin Chikagian's favourite main event? Bless.